Manhattan, Whitmore Foundation Gala. Grace Morgan adjusted her black cocktail dress for the 10th time as she watched Manhattan's elite mingle in the opulent ballroom of the plaza. As a PR coordinator, she was here for work, not pleasure. But 3 glasses of champagne later, that distinction was getting blurry. "Grace, you need to see this," whispered Emma, her best friend and the event photographer tugging her arm. Brad just walked in with his new girlfriend. Grace's stomach dropped. Brad Morrison, her ex-boyfriend from college, had arrived with a stunning blonde. It had been 2 years since their amicable breakup when they realized they wanted different things in life. But seeing him so happy with someone else still stung a little. "He looks happy," Grace said, trying to sound mature about it. "You're way too good for him anyway. Remember how he never wanted to try new restaurants or travel anywhere that didn't have a golf course? Emma, we broke up because we were incompatible, not because he was a bad person. Still boring, though." Grace watched Brad laugh at something his girlfriend said. He did look genuinely happy, and despite the tiny pang of nostalgia, she was glad for him. Really, she was just feeling a bit melancholy about being perpetually single, while everyone around her seemed to be pairing off. "I'm going to say hello," Grace decided. "Be mature about this." "Grace, you've had 3 glasses of champagne. Your definition of mature might be slightly compromised." But Grace was already moving through the crowd, determined to prove she could handle this like an adult. Brad was standing near the bar, and she approached with what she hoped was a friendly, confident smile. "Brad, hi!" she called out, a little louder than intended. He turned, and for a moment Grace forgot what she was going to say. In that champagne-hazed moment of awkwardness, she did the first thing that came to mind, to show how totally fine and unaffected she was. She reached out to give him a friendly kiss on the cheek. Except Brad moved at the last second to introduce his girlfriend to someone else, and Grace's friendly peck landed squarely on the lips of the man standing behind him. A complete stranger. A tall stranger with ice-cold green eyes who was watching her with a mixture of surprise and what looked like amusement. He didn't push her away. In fact, his hand had moved to her waist in an almost protective gesture. "Sorry," she whispered, still too close to his face. "I was aiming for someone else entirely." "Lucky me," he replied, his voice low with a slight British accent. "Though I have to say, your aim could use some work." The ballroom had fallen silent. Grace could feel hundreds of eyes on them, phones being raised, camera flashes going off. Her brain finally processed the situation. She had just accidentally kissed one of the most powerful and dangerous men in America, Henry Ward, the billionaire that gossip magazines called the Ice King for his reputation of destroying business rivals without blinking. The man who collected companies like others collected stamps, always with a cold smile and a move 3 steps ahead. And she had just given him the scandal of the year through sheer clumsiness. "Oh, wow," she murmured, trying to step back, but his hand remained firm on her waist. "No," he said softly, but loud enough for some to hear. "Don't apologize. It was unexpected." His green eyes sparkled with something Grace couldn't decipher. Amusement? Interest? Calculation? "Mr. Ward," a voice interrupted. A man in an expensive suit approached, clearly an assistant. "The press is—" "Let them speculate," Henry said, finally releasing Grace, but not before slipping a card into her hand. "Miss Grace. Grace Morgan. And I am so sorry for the confusion. Grace." The way he said her name made something strange happen in her stomach. "Don't be sorry. It's been the most interesting evening I've had in months." He walked away with the calm of someone who had just won a game no one else knew they were playing. Grace looked at the card. Just a phone number, no name. When she looked up, Henry had disappeared into the crowd, but she could feel he was still watching her. Emma appeared beside her, mouth agape. "Grace, do you have any idea what you just did?" Grace looked around. Brad was staring at her in shock from across the room. Manhattan's elite were whispering excitedly. Photographers were still snapping pictures. "I think," she said slowly, I just accidentally created the biggest social media moment of my life. What she didn't know was that Henry Ward was thinking exactly the same thing, and he was absolutely fascinated by the woman who had just turned his predictable evening completely upside down. The photo was everywhere. Grace stared at her phone screen, watching the image of herself kissing Henry Ward spread across social media like wildfire. The headlines were getting more creative by the hour. Mystery woman melts the Ice King. Who's the girl who conquered Ward? And her personal favorite, the kiss that stopped Manhattan. Turn it off, Emma said, snatching the phone from Grace's hands as they sat in their favorite cafe in Soho. You're torturing yourself. I'm probably unemployed, Em. My boss has been giving me the cold shoulder all morning, and I have 3 missed calls from HR. Grace buried her face in her hands. All because I have terrible spatial awareness when I've been drinking. Technically, you showed excellent coordination. You could have face-planted into the chocolate fountain, but instead you accidentally kissed the most eligible bachelor in New York. A man who could destroy my entire career with a single phone call? A man who gave you his private number. Grace pulled the elegant card from her purse, studying it for the 100th time since last night. No name, no company logo, just 10 digits in embossed silver. What if he wants to sue me for assault? What if he wants to take you on his private jet to Paris? Emma. What? The man's been single for 2 years since his divorce. According to Forbes, he's been turning down supermodels and socialites left and right. Maybe you're exactly what he needs. Someone who doesn't throw herself at his feet begging for attention. Grace's phone buzzed. An unknown number. Good morning, Grace. I trust you've seen the news. Coffee? H. Oh my gosh, it's him. Grace showed Emma the message, her hands shaking slightly. Answer him. What do I say? Yes, obviously. When will you get another chance to have coffee with the most powerful man in New York? He's not just powerful, he's intimidating. He can be both, in fact, that's probably part of his charm. Grace stared at the message. She could ignore it, pretend the whole thing never happened, and spend the rest of her life wondering what if. Or she could answer and potentially step into a world she wasn't prepared for. Her phone buzzed again. Unless you prefer tea, I'm flexible on beverages, less so on timing. 1 hour, blue bottle coffee, Rockefeller Center. I'll be the one not accidentally kissing strangers. Despite everything, Grace found herself smiling. He's got a sense of humor, she said, showing Emma the second message. And he's persistent. I like him already. You don't even know him. I know he could have had security escort you out last night and instead asked you for coffee. That says something about his character. Grace looked at her reflection in the cafe window. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She was wearing her favorite jeans and a simple sweater, and she looked exactly like what she was, a regular person about to meet someone way out of her league. I look completely ordinary. You look real. Something tells me Henry Ward doesn't see much of that in his world. 45 minutes later, Grace stood outside Blue Bottle Coffee, second-guessing every decision that had led her there. Through the window, she could see him at a corner table, reading what looked like the Wall Street Journal. Even in casual clothes, dark jeans and a navy cashmere sweater, he commanded attention. The baristas moved around him with the careful deference reserved for very important customers. She was about to turn around when he looked up and saw her. Their eyes met through the glass and he smiled. Not the cold, calculating smile she'd seen in business magazines, but something warmer. Almost approachable. Before she could lose her nerve, Grace pushed through the door. You came, he said, standing as she approached. Up close, without the champagne haze and formal lighting, she could see he was even more attractive than she'd remembered. I wasn't entirely sure you would. I wasn't sure either, Grace admitted, accepting the chair he pulled out for her. This whole situation is pretty surreal. Honest. I appreciate that. He signaled the barista. Coffee? Or are you more of a tea person? I realized I made an assumption in my text. Coffee's perfect. Strong coffee. I didn't sleep much last night. Neither did I, though probably for different reasons. He studied her face with those intense green eyes. You're nervous. It wasn't a question, so Grace didn't treat it like one. Wouldn't you be? That depends entirely on your intentions. Grace Morgan, 28, Public Relations Coordinator, graduated from Northwestern, currently employed at Sterling Communications. Though I suspect that might be changing soon given this morning's headlines. Grace's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. You had me investigated? I had my assistant do some basic research. There's a difference. When someone creates a media sensation involving me, I like to know who they are. His expression softened slightly. Nothing invasive, I promise, just the professional basics. And what did your research tell you? That you're exactly who you appeared to be last night. No hidden agenda, no calculated social climbing, no history of targeting high-profile men. Just someone who had a very human moment at exactly the wrong time. Or the right time, depending on your perspective. Henry's eyebrows rose slightly. Interesting way to look at it. Well, I figured I had two choices. Be mortified and hide under a rock for the rest of my life, or own it and see what happens. And which did you choose? Grace gestured around them. I'm here, aren't I? For the first time since she'd met him, Henry Ward looked genuinely surprised. And then he laughed, a real laugh, not the polite chuckle she'd expected. You know, Grace Morgan, I think you might be exactly what I need. For what? Henry leaned back in his chair, studying her with renewed interest. How would you feel about a proposition? Grace set down her coffee cup carefully, trying to read Henry's expression. A proposition? That sounds ominous. On the contrary, I think you'll find it mutually beneficial. Henry pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. Social media notifications were still flooding in, thousands of comments, shares, and speculation about their kiss. Do you see this? Hard to miss it. I'm trending on Twitter, never thought that would happen to me. The media is calling it the romance of the century. Ice King falls for mystery woman. The kiss that changed everything. My publicist has fielded 47 interview requests since this morning. Grace winced. I'm so sorry. I never meant to create this circus. Don't apologize. This is the most positive press I've received in years. Henry leaned forward, his business instincts clearly kicking in. My usual media coverage focuses on corporate acquisitions, lawsuit victories, or speculation about my personal life. None of it particularly flattering. But this makes me look human. You are human, Grace said, then immediately felt silly for stating the obvious. Not according to the New York Times. Last month they called me a corporate shark who wouldn't recognize genuine emotion if it kissed him in the face. Henry's mouth quirked up at the corner. Turns out they were more prophetic than they knew. Despite her nervousness, Grace laughed. So what exactly are you proposing? A partnership. You help me rehabilitate my public image, and I help you build the career you actually want. I don't understand. Henry pulled out a tablet and slid it across the table. On the screen was Grace's LinkedIn profile, along with several articles she'd written for PR trade publications. My research was more thorough than I initially let on. You graduated summa cum laude, with a degree in communications and a minor in business. You've written extensively about authentic brand storytelling and corporate social responsibility. Your professors called you one of the most promising students they'd ever taught. Grace stared at the screen, uncomfortable with how exposed she felt. How did you get access to my academic records? I have excellent resources. The point is, you're working as a coordinator at a mid-tier firm, handling corporate event planning and basic media outreach. You're overqualified and underutilized. Jobs in PR are competitive. I was lucky to get hired anywhere. You were hired because you're talented. You're stuck because you're at the wrong firm. Henry tapped the tablet screen. Sterling Communications has a reputation for treating junior staff as disposable. High turnover, limited advancement opportunities, mediocre clients. Grace couldn't argue with that assessment. She'd been there 18 months and had watched 3 other coordinators quit out of frustration. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we use this media attention to both our advantages. You become my official public relations consultant. We let the media believe there's a romantic element to our relationship. Nothing confirmed, just enough speculation to keep them interested. Meanwhile, you get to work on high-profile campaigns. Build a portfolio that will open doors anywhere you want to go. You want me to fake a relationship with you? I want you to help me seem more approachable while you build your career. If people think the Ice King has melted for someone, it changes the entire narrative around my business dealings. Grace stared at him, trying to process the offer. This is insane. This is strategic. What's in it for you, really? You could hire any PR firm in the city. Henry was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was more honest than it had been all morning. I'm tired of being seen as a villain. Every deal I make, every company I acquire, the media paints me as some corporate raider destroying lives for profit. The truth is more complicated than that. What is the truth? I specialize in turning around failing companies. Yes, that sometimes means layoffs, but it also means saving jobs that would have been lost entirely if the company went under. Last year, I saved 3 manufacturing firms from bankruptcy. The media focused on the 40 jobs that were cut in restructuring, not the 800 that were preserved. Grace found herself leaning forward, genuinely interested despite her nervousness. Why don't you have a PR team handling that narrative? I've had 4 different firms in the past 3 years. They all try to make me into something I'm not, either softer than I am, or they lean into the villain image because it's easier to market. Henry met her eyes. You're the first person in a long time who's looked at me like I'm just a person. You are just a person. A very wealthy, somewhat intimidating person, but still a person. Exactly, and that's what I need help showing the world. Grace sat back in her chair, overwhelmed. This is a lot to process. I know. But consider this. What's your alternative? Go back to Sterling Communications and hope your boss doesn't fire you for creating negative publicity? Spend the next 5 years planning corporate retreats and writing press releases about quarterly earnings? The thought made Grace's stomach sink. She'd dreamed of doing meaningful work in communications, maybe even starting her own firm someday. But she'd been so focused on just surviving in her current job that she'd stopped thinking about her actual goals. What would this partnership actually look like? You'd work as an independent consultant. I'd pay you more in 6 months than you make in 2 years at Sterling. You'd handle my personal brand management, help with corporate communications strategy, and yes, we'd maintain the illusion that there might be something romantic between us. For how long? 6 months initially. If it works for both of us, we can extend it. If not, you'll have a portfolio that will get you hired anywhere you want to go. Grace's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. How's it going? Are you running away to elope or running away to hide? I need to think about this, Grace said finally. Of course, but Grace? Henry leaned forward again, and she caught a hint of his cologne, something expensive and subtle. Don't think too long. The media attention from last night won't last forever. We need to capitalize on it while people are still interested. How long do I have? 24 hours. Meet me tomorrow at my office, Ward Industries, 47th floor. Come prepared to give me an answer. Henry stood and pulled out his wallet, leaving a $50 bill on the table for their coffee. As he turned to go, Grace called after him. Henry? He turned back, eyebrows raised. If I say yes, what happens if we actually start liking each other? For a moment, his carefully controlled expression slipped, and she saw something that looked almost vulnerable. Then I suppose we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. After he left, Grace sat alone with her coffee, staring at the business card he'd left behind. This time it had his full name and company information embossed in elegant silver lettering. Her phone rang. Emma. Well, how did it go? Are you still alive? I think, Grace said slowly. I just got offered the opportunity of a lifetime. Or I'm about to make the biggest mistake of my life. Knowing you, probably both. So what are you going to do? Grace looked out the window at the busy Manhattan street, watching people hurry past with their own dreams and ambitions and complications. I honestly have no idea. But even as she said it, Grace realized that for the first time in months she felt truly excited about the possibilities ahead of her. Terrified, but excited. Maybe that was exactly what she needed. Grace spent the rest of the day walking through Central Park, her mind spinning with Henry's proposition. By the time she returned to her tiny Upper West Side apartment, she had managed to talk herself into and out of accepting his offer at least 17 times. "You look like someone who's been wrestling with a life-changing decision," Emma said, looking up from Grace's couch where she was editing photos on her laptop. "Lucky for you, I brought reinforcements." She gestured to the coffee table, which was now covered with Chinese takeout containers and a bottle of wine. "You're a lifesaver," Grace said, collapsing into her favorite armchair. "I feel like my brain is going to explode." "Okay, let's break this down logically. Pro and con list." "I'll take notes." Emma grabbed a notepad from Grace's coffee table. "Start with the pros. The money is incredible. He's offering me more in 6 months than I make in 2 years. Good start. What else? The experience would be amazing. Working on high-profile communication strategy, building a portfolio that could open doors anywhere." Grace picked up a spring roll and took a thoughtful bite. "And honestly, the work sounds interesting. His point about the media narrative is valid. They do paint him as this heartless corporate raider. But the companies he's acquired, the jobs he's actually saved, there's a real story there. You've been researching him." "I spent 3 hours going through business journals this afternoon." "Emma, he's not the villain the media makes him out to be. Last year alone, his interventions saved over 2,000 jobs. But all the headlines focused on the layoffs during restructuring." Emma scribbled notes. "So you're genuinely interested in the work. That's important. What else?" "It would get me out of Sterling Communications. My boss, Rebecca, has been making my life miserable for months. She takes credit for my ideas, gives me the worst assignments, and I swear she's trying to push me out. I've been telling you to quit that place for a year. I needed the experience and the steady paycheck." Grace sipped her wine. "But this would be, well, it would be my shot at doing something that actually matters." "Okay, now the cons," Grace groaned. "Where do I start? It's fake, Emma. The whole romantic angle would be completely manufactured for public consumption." "But would it be, though?" Emma set down her pen and looked at Grace seriously. "You were pretty flustered when you came home from coffee with him. And don't think I didn't notice you've been calling him Henry instead of Mr. Ward. That doesn't mean anything. It means you're comfortable with him, which is weird considering he's supposedly this intimidating ice king." Grace considered that. Henry had been intense, yes, but not in a way that made her feel small or stupid. If anything, he'd seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. "He listened to me," she said slowly. "Like, really listened. When I talked about authentic brand storytelling, he asked follow-up questions. Good ones. Most people's eyes glaze over when I get into PR theory. See, there's already a connection there. But what if working together ruins it? What if I'm terrible at the job? What if he realizes I'm just some nobody from Ohio who's way out of her depth?" Emma reached over and grabbed Grace's hand. "Stop. You're not some nobody. You're brilliant at what you do, you just haven't had the chance to prove it yet. Remember the Hartley Foundation campaign you developed? The one Rebecca stole and presented as her own?" Grace nodded reluctantly. She'd developed a complete rebranding strategy for a struggling nonprofit, only to watch her boss present it to the client and take full credit. That campaign was genius. It was innovative and heartfelt, and it would have worked perfectly if they'd actually let you implement it instead of watering it down. Emma squeezed her hand. "You have talent, Grace. You just need someone to recognize it. But the fake relationship part, who says it has to stay fake?" Grace nearly choked on her wine. "Emma, I'm serious. You said yourself there was chemistry. The man could have any woman in New York, but he specifically sought you out. Don't you think that means something? It means he sees a business opportunity. Maybe. Or maybe he sees something else." Emma pulled out her phone and scrolled through social media. "Look at these comments on the photos from last night." Grace reluctantly took the phone. The photo of her and Henry kissing was still circulating widely, and the comments were overwhelmingly positive. Finally, someone who made Henry Ward smile. She looks so normal and sweet. Exactly what he needs. Best celebrity couple ever, and we don't even know who she is. The way he's looking at her, that's not fake. Grace scrolled through dozens of similar comments. People are really invested in this. Because it feels real. Look at his body language in the photo, Grace. That's not a man who's annoyed or calculating. That's a man who's genuinely intrigued. Grace studied the photo more carefully. Henry's hand was on her waist, yes, but his expression was softer than she remembered. Almost protective. Even if you're right, which I'm not saying you are, this is still a huge risk. What if it doesn't work out? What if I burn bridges with Sterling and then this falls apart? What if it does work out? What if this is exactly the break you've been waiting for? Grace's phone rang, interrupting her spiraling thoughts. The caller ID showed her sister's name. Hi, Lily. Grace Morgan, what the heck is going on? Her sister's voice was excited and slightly accusatory. Mom just called me because Mrs. Henderson from next door saw you on some gossip show kissing a billionaire. Please tell me this is some kind of elaborate prank. Grace rubbed her forehead. She'd forgotten about the inevitable family fallout. It's complicated. Are you dating Henry Ward? The Henry Ward? Not exactly. It's more like we're exploring possibilities. Emma made an exaggerated face at Grace's diplomatic non-answer. Grace, this is insane. He's like Forbes list wealthy. What could you possibly have in common? The question stung, even though Grace knew Lily didn't mean it that way. Her family had always been supportive, but they also had a tendency to remind her how different her life in New York was from their small-town Ohio existence. We both like coffee? Grace said weakly. I'm serious. Be careful, okay? Men like that don't date women like us unless they want something. After Grace hung up, she sat in silence for a few minutes. Emma waited patiently, understanding that her friend needed to process. She's not wrong, Grace finally said. We are from completely different worlds. So what? You're smart, you're talented, you're beautiful, and you made him laugh. Those things don't depend on your bank account. But what if this is all just some elaborate game to him? What if he gets bored and moves on and I'm left with nothing? What if you don't take the chance and spend the rest of your life wondering what could have been? Grace looked around her small apartment, the second-hand furniture, the stack of bills on her kitchen counter, the rejection letters from PR firms tucked in her desk drawer. Then she thought about Henry's offer, the excitement in his voice when he talked about changing the narrative around his business. I'm scared, she admitted. Good. Scared means it matters. Grace's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, but she recognized it as Henry's from their earlier conversation. I know I said 24 hours, but I wanted to add one thing. Whatever you decide, I want you to know that meeting you has been the most interesting thing that's happened to me in a very long time. H. Emma read the message over Grace's shoulder. Okay, that's not fair. He's being charming. Despite her anxiety, Grace smiled. He really is. So, what are you going to do? Grace thought about her conversation with Henry that morning, the way he'd looked genuinely surprised when she called him human. She thought about her job at Sterling, the daily frustration of watching her ideas get dismissed or stolen. She thought about the dreams she'd put on hold because they seemed too impractical, too ambitious for someone like her. I'm going to say yes. Really? Really? Grace felt a flutter of excitement mixed with terror. I'm going to walk into his office tomorrow and tell him I'll do it. And if it turns out to be the biggest mistake of your life? Grace grinned, feeling suddenly lighter than she had in months. Then at least it'll be an interesting mistake. Emma raised her wine glass. To interesting mistakes and fake relationships that might not stay fake. To taking chances, Grace corrected, clinking her glass against Emma's. As they drank, Grace felt a familiar buzz of anticipation that she hadn't experienced since college. The feeling that she was about to embark on something that could change everything. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely unlike anything she'd ever done before. which was exactly why she knew she had to do it. The next morning, Grace stood in front of her closet for 20 minutes, trying to decide what one wore to accept a fake relationship proposition from a billionaire. She finally settled on a navy blazer, black pants, and her most professional heels. Confident but not trying too hard. The Ward Industries building was even more impressive in daylight, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky like a monument to ambition. Grace's reflection in the lobby's polished floor looked small and nervous, but she squared her shoulders and approached the reception desk. "Grace Morgan to see Henry Ward," she told the impeccably dressed receptionist. "Of course, Ms. Morgan. Mr. Ward is expecting you. The elevator to your right will take you directly to the 47th floor." The elevator ride seemed to last forever, giving Grace plenty of time to second-guess her decision. When the doors finally opened, she stepped into a reception area that looked like something from a design magazine, all clean lines and expensive art. "Ms. Morgan?" A woman in her 40s approached with a warm smile. "I'm Patricia, Mr. Ward's assistant. He's ready for you." Patricia led her down a hallway lined with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering breathtaking views of Manhattan. At the end of the hall, she knocked on a door and opened it without waiting for a response. "Mr. Ward, Ms. Morgan is here." Henry's office was exactly what Grace had expected, massive, intimidating, and perfectly organized. He was standing behind his desk, still in that navy sweater from yesterday, looking like he'd been waiting for her. "Grace, thank you for coming." His voice was carefully neutral, but she caught something that might have been relief in his expression. Patricia closed the door behind them, leaving them alone. Grace walked toward the desk, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "I've made my decision," she said, proud that her voice sounded steadier than she felt. Henry's expression didn't change. "And?" Grace took a deep breath, thinking of Emma's words about interesting mistakes and taking chances. "Yes, I'll do it." The smile that spread across Henry Ward's face was nothing like the cold, calculated expression she'd seen in magazines. It was genuine and relieved and almost boyish. "Really? Really, but I have conditions." Henry's relief was palpable, but he quickly composed himself, gesturing to the chairs arranged around a small conference table by the window. "Please, sit. I'd like to hear your conditions." Grace settled into the leather chair, trying not to be intimidated by the panoramic view of Manhattan spread out below them. "First, I want a proper contract, not just a handshake deal. I want everything spelled out. My responsibilities, compensation, timeline, and most importantly, the boundaries of this arrangement. Of course, I've already had my legal team draft something preliminary." Henry pulled a folder from his desk. "Though I suspect you'll want to review it with your own attorney." "I don't have an attorney." "You will by the end of the week. Consider it part of your compensation package." Henry sat across from her, his attention completely focused on what she was saying. "What else?" "Second, I want creative control over the PR strategy. You can give input and feedback, but I'm not interested in being a mouthpiece for someone else's ideas. If you want authentic brand storytelling, you have to trust me to tell the story." Henry nodded slowly. "That's actually refreshing. Most consultants tell me what they think I want to hear." "Most consultants probably haven't accidentally kissed you in front of half of Manhattan's social elite." Grace felt herself relaxing slightly. "Third, the fake relationship aspect has boundaries. No public displays of affection beyond what's necessary for photos. No private events unless they're directly related to the PR strategy. And if either of us starts dating someone else for real, we reassess the arrangement." "Understood. Though I have to ask, are you currently seeing anyone?" "No. Are you?" "No." Henry leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Any other conditions?" Grace hesitated, then decided to voice the concern that had been nagging at her since yesterday. "I want to understand your endgame here. What does success look like to you? Because if this is just about softening your image for some major acquisition or IPO, I need to know that up front." Henry was quiet for a long moment, and Grace wondered if she'd overstepped. When he finally spoke, His voice was more honest than she'd expected. 3 years ago, my father died. He built this company from nothing, started with a small investment firm and grew it into what you see today. He was brilliant and ruthless when he needed to be, but he was also fair. People respected him. Henry stared out the window at the city below. When I took over, I thought I could do things differently, be more collaborative, more transparent. But the business world doesn't reward softness, and I learned quickly that if I wanted to protect what my father built, I had to be tougher than anyone expected. So you became the Ice King. I became what I needed to become. But somewhere along the way, I think I lost sight of why I was doing it. He looked back at her. Last month, I acquired a textile company in North Carolina. They were 3 weeks from bankruptcy, would have laid off 300 workers. My restructuring plan saved 280 of those jobs, but the local newspaper ran a front-page story about the 20 jobs that were cut. The headline called me a heartless corporate vulture. Grace could hear the frustration in his voice. That must have been difficult. What was difficult was getting a letter from one of the workers I saved, thanking me for keeping the plant open so she could pay for her daughter's college tuition. She had no idea I was supposedly the villain in her story. Henry met Grace's eyes. I want to change that narrative, not because I need good publicity for some business deal, but because I want the work I'm doing to actually matter to people. Grace felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't the cold calculation she'd expected. This was someone who genuinely cared about the impact of his work, but had lost the ability to communicate that effectively. That's exactly the kind of story we should be telling, she said. But it requires vulnerability. You'll have to let people see behind the corporate facade. Are you saying I have a facade? Henry's mouth quirked up in what was becoming a familiar, almost smile. I'm saying that the man who just told me about wanting his work to matter is not the same man I read about in Forbes magazine. Which version do you prefer? The question caught Grace off guard. There was something almost vulnerable in the way he asked it, like her answer actually mattered to him. I prefer the real version, she said softly. They looked at each other for a moment, and Grace felt that same flutter of attraction she'd experienced at the gala. This was dangerous territory. She was supposed to be thinking about this professionally, not getting caught up in the way Henry's eyes seemed to see right through her carefully constructed defenses. So, she said, clearing her throat, when do we start? How about right now? Henry stood and walked to his desk, returning with a tablet. I have a board meeting this afternoon with the executives from that textile company I mentioned. They're expecting the usual corporate presentation about quarterly projections and cost-cutting measures. And you want to do something different? I want to tell them about Maria Santos, the woman who wrote me that letter, and about Tom Bradley, the plant supervisor who's been there for 30 years and came up with the efficiency improvements that made the restructuring possible. I want to remind them that behind every number on our spreadsheets is a real person with a real life. Grace felt a spark of excitement. This was exactly the kind of authentic storytelling she'd dreamed of doing. That's a completely different approach than what they'll be expecting, which is why I need your help. Can you help me figure out how to tell that story without sounding like I'm pandering or making excuses? Absolutely. Grace pulled out her notebook, her mind already racing with possibilities. But first, I need more background. Tell me about the company, the challenges they were facing, the restructuring process, and I want to hear more about Maria and Tom. For the next hour, Henry walked Grace through the details of the North Carolina acquisition. As he talked, she began to see not just the business strategy, but the human story underneath it. This wasn't a corporate raider destroying lives for profit. This was someone trying to balance the harsh realities of business with genuine concern for the people affected by his decisions. Okay, Grace said, looking up from her notes. Here's what I think we should do. She outlined a presentation strategy that wove together the financial necessity of the restructuring with the human impact of saving the company. Instead of leading with numbers, they would start with stories. Instead of focusing on what was cut, They would highlight what was preserved and strengthened. The key, Grace explained, is helping them understand that tough decisions don't have to be heartless decisions. You saved that company, Henry. You should own that. Henry listened intently, occasionally asking questions or offering additional context. Grace found herself impressed by how quickly he grasped the strategic elements of her approach. This wasn't just a wealthy man who'd inherited a successful business. He was genuinely thoughtful about the work he was doing. "This is good," he said when she finished. "Really good. How quickly can we put this together?" Grace glanced at her watch. "When's the meeting?" 3 o'clock. That gives us 4 hours. It'll be tight, but doable. I'll need access to your research team and someone who can help with presentation design. Done. Patricia can set you up with whatever you need. Henry stood, but instead of heading for the door, he remained by the window, looking uncertain. "Grace, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you really say yes to this? It's not just about the money or the career opportunity, is it?" Grace considered the question carefully. She could give him the professional answer, talk about portfolio building and networking opportunities, but something about the way he'd opened up to her made her want to be equally honest. "Because I've spent the last 18 months watching mediocre people take credit for my ideas while I smile and say nothing. I've been playing it safe, being grateful for whatever scraps I could get, and it's been slowly killing my passion for this work." She met his gaze. "When you described wanting your work to matter, I recognized something. I want my work to matter too." "And you think this arrangement will help with that?" "I think," Grace said slowly, "that working with someone who's willing to be vulnerable about wanting to do better might remind me why I loved this field in the first place." Henry nodded, something like understanding passing between them. "Well then, let's go change some minds." The next few hours passed in a blur of research, writing, and presentation design. Grace found herself completely absorbed in the work, collaborating with Henry's team to craft a narrative that was both compelling and authentic. She'd forgotten how energizing it could be to work on something that felt genuinely important. Henry proved to be an excellent collaborator. He trusted her instincts while offering valuable insights about his audience and the company culture. When they disagreed on approach, they discussed it thoughtfully rather than deferring to hierarchy. "You know," Grace said as they reviewed the final presentation, "this is the most engaged I've felt about work in months." "Good, because if this goes well, I have about 12 other projects that could use your touch." At 2:45, they made their way to the boardroom. Grace had offered to attend the meeting to answer questions about the strategic approach, but Henry had declined. "This is my story to tell," he'd said. "But I want you to watch from the observation room. I'd like your feedback afterward." The observation room was a small space behind one-way glass that allowed Grace to see and hear the meeting without being seen. She watched as Henry's board members filed in, 8 executives in expensive suits, all looking like they were expecting a routine quarterly review. Henry entered last, carrying the tablet with their presentation. As he began to speak, Grace felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. "Before we discuss numbers today," Henry began, "I want to tell you about Maria Santos." What followed was a masterclass in authentic leadership communication. Henry told Maria's story and Tom's story, and the story of a company that was saved rather than destroyed. He presented the financial data, but in the context of human impact. He acknowledged the difficulty of the decisions while owning the positive outcomes. Grace watched the faces of the board members as Henry spoke. The initial skepticism gave way to engaged interest, and by the end of the presentation, several of them were leaning forward, asking thoughtful questions about how this approach could be applied to other acquisitions. "This is exactly the kind of leadership our shareholders want to see," said Helen Morrison, the board's longest-serving member. "It shows strength and compassion in equal measure." When the meeting ended, Grace felt a surge of professional pride unlike anything she'd experienced at Sterling Communications. This was the kind of work she'd dreamed of doing, helping leaders communicate authentically about complex challenges. Henry found her in the observation room a few minutes later, his face showing a mixture of relief and excitement. "That went well," he said, though it was clearly an understatement. "That went brilliantly. You were brilliant." Grace couldn't contain her enthusiasm. "Did you see how engaged they were? Helen Morrison looked like she wanted to give you a standing ovation. They responded exactly the way you predicted they would." Henry sat down across from her, looking genuinely impressed. "You have a gift for this, Grace." "We have a gift for this," she corrected. "You trusted the process and delivered authentically. That's not as easy as you made it look." "So what's next?" Grace pulled out her notebook, her mind already racing with possibilities. "Next, we take this approach public. I want to set up a series of interviews where you can tell these stories to a broader audience. Maybe start with trade publications, then move to mainstream business media." "And the romantic angle?" Grace felt her cheeks warm slightly. "We let people draw their own conclusions. A few carefully staged public appearances, some social media moments. Nothing too obvious. Speaking of which," Henry pulled out his phone, "we should probably be seen leaving the building together. There are usually photographers outside around this time." As they made their way to the elevator, Grace realized that somewhere in the course of the afternoon, her perspective on this arrangement had shifted. What had started as a calculated career move was beginning to feel like something more collaborative, more genuine. "Henry," she said as the elevator doors closed. "Yes?" "I think this partnership might actually work." "I was thinking the same thing." As they descended toward the lobby, Grace caught their reflection in the elevator's mirrored walls. They looked like partners, she realized, like a team. It was a surprisingly appealing image. The lobby was indeed filled with photographers, just as Henry had predicted. As they emerged from the elevator together, Grace felt the familiar flutter of camera flashes. But this time, instead of panic, she felt a strange sense of purpose. This was her life now. This was her choice. And for the first time in a very long time, Grace Morgan felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. 3 months later, Grace's new office on the 45th floor of Ward Industries had a view almost as spectacular as Henry's, and she still couldn't quite believe it was hers. The mahogany desk, the leather chairs, the wall of awards and framed articles featuring their successful campaigns, it all felt like something out of a dream. "Stop pinching yourself," Emma said, settling into one of the visitor chairs with a cup of coffee. "You've been here 3 months. It's time to accept that you actually deserve this." I know. It's just..." Grace gestured around the office. 6 months ago, I was sharing a cubicle with someone who microwaved fish every day for lunch. This feels surreal." "What feels surreal is watching you on the cover of Forbes magazine next to the headline, 'The Woman Who Humanized Henry Ward.'" Emma pulled up the article on her phone. Listen to this quote. "Under Morgan's strategic guidance, Ward Industries has transformed from a feared corporate predator to a model of responsible capitalism, proving that profitability and humanity aren't mutually exclusive." Grace blushed. The Forbes feature had been the culmination of months of carefully orchestrated interviews, public appearances, and strategic storytelling. What had started as damage control for an accidental kiss had evolved into a complete rebranding of one of America's most powerful companies. Their first major success had been the Hartwell manufacturing turnaround. Instead of the typical corporate acquisition announcement, they'd told the story through the eyes of Sarah Hartwell, the third-generation owner who was struggling to keep her family business afloat while caring for her disabled son. Henry's investment hadn't just saved the company. It had allowed Sarah to expand their veteran hiring program and establish a scholarship fund for employees' children. The media response had been unprecedented. Instead of the usual headlines about corporate takeovers, business journals ran features about the new face of responsible investment. The Wall Street Journal had called it a masterclass in stakeholder capitalism. "The work speaks for itself," Grace said modestly. "I just helped Henry tell his story more effectively." "Right. And I'm sure the fact that you two look completely smitten with each other in every photo has nothing to do with the positive coverage." Grace's stomach did that familiar flip it had been doing whenever someone mentioned her relationship with Henry. Over the past 3 months, the line between their professional partnership and whatever was developing between them personally had become increasingly blurred. It had started small, coffee meetings that ran long, strategy sessions that turned into conversations about everything except work, casual touches that lingered just a moment too long. Grace had tried to maintain professional boundaries, but Henry had a way of looking at her during meetings that made her forget they were supposed to be keeping things business only. The media had noticed too. Page 6 had run a series of photos from various events showing Henry's hand on Grace's back, her laughing at something he'd whispered in her ear, the two of them deep in conversation at charity galas, while everyone else seemed to fade into the background. "We're just comfortable with each other," Grace said carefully. "Comfortable? Grace, I saw you two at the Children's Hospital fundraiser last week. The way he looks at you when you're talking to other people? That's not comfortable, that's possessive." "In a good way," Emma added quickly, seeing Grace's expression. Grace remembered that night clearly. She'd been speaking with Dr. Martinez about the hospital's new pediatric wing when she'd felt Henry's presence behind her. Without thinking, she'd stepped back slightly, settling against his chest as his arm came around her waist. It had felt so natural that she hadn't realized what they'd done until she saw the photographer's flash. "Maybe we're a little too comfortable," Grace admitted. Before Emma could respond, Grace's assistant knocked on the door. "Ms. Morgan, Mr. Ward would like to see you in his office when you have a moment. Tell him I'll be right there." Grace turned back to Emma. "We'll finish this conversation later." "Oh, we definitely will. And I want details about whatever's happening between you two." Grace made her way to Henry's office, trying to ignore the knowing looks from his staff. Over the past month, their meetings had become more frequent and less formal. Sometimes they discussed strategy, sometimes they just talked. Yesterday, she'd found herself in his office at 7 p.m., sharing Chinese takeout and debating the ethics of corporate social responsibility while the sun set over Manhattan. Patricia, Henry's assistant, had taken to keeping Grace's favorite tea stocked in the office kitchen. The security team no longer asked for her ID when she arrived after hours. Somewhere along the way, Ward Industries had started feeling like home. "You wanted to see me?" Grace knocked on his open door. Henry looked up from his computer, and that smile, the real one, not his corporate smile, spread across his face. "Always. But specifically, I wanted to discuss the Peterson Industries acquisition." Grace settled into her usual chair across from his desk. Over the months, they'd developed an easy rhythm of collaboration that felt as natural as breathing. Henry would present the business challenges. Grace would ask the questions that helped them dig deeper, and together they'd find solutions that neither could have reached alone. "What's the situation?" "They're a family-owned manufacturing company in Michigan. 4th generation, about 800 employees. But they've been struggling with debt for the past 2 years. The family wants to retire but doesn't want to see the company broken up or the workers laid off." Grace pulled out her notebook, already thinking about the narrative possibilities. "That sounds exactly like the kind of acquisition we should be publicizing. A family legacy preserved, jobs protected, community investment." "Exactly. But there's a complication." Henry leaned back in his chair, and Grace noticed the tension in his shoulders. She'd learned to read his moods over the past few months, the way he rubbed his forehead when he was frustrated, how his voice got quieter when he was really thinking through a problem, the particular set of his jaw when he was facing a decision he didn't want to make. "My board is pushing for a different approach. They want to buy the company, strip out the valuable assets, and sell off the rest. It would be more profitable in the short term, but it would destroy everything the Peterson family built and eliminate most of those 800 jobs." Henry rubbed his forehead. "I've been going in circles about this for weeks. The numbers support the board's approach, but it goes against everything we've been working toward." "Yes, and I keep thinking about what you said 3 months ago, about wanting our work to matter." Henry met her eyes. "This decision will define what kind of company Ward Industries really is." Grace felt a surge of pride that Henry was including her in such a significant decision. 3 months ago, she'd been planning corporate events and writing press releases about quarterly earnings. Now she was helping shape the strategic direction of a billion-dollar company. But more than that, she could see how much this decision was weighing on Henry. The man who'd once been called the Ice King was genuinely tormented by the idea of destroying a family business for profit. What does your gut tell you? My gut tells me to buy the company, keep it intact, and find a way to make it profitable without destroying what makes it valuable. Henry's voice was firm. But my gut doesn't have to answer to shareholders. Your shareholders hired you to make good decisions, not just profitable ones. There's a difference. Grace leaned forward. What if we could show that the ethical approach is also the smart business approach? How? Grace's mind was already racing with possibilities. This was what she'd been trained for, what she was good at, finding the story that connected business strategy with human impact. Give me 24 hours. I want to research Peterson Industries, their market position, their community impact. There might be value there that your board isn't seeing. Grace, you don't have to. Yes, I do. This is exactly why you hired me. She stood, energized by the challenge. We've spent 3 months telling the world that Henry Ward makes decisions based on more than just profit margins. Now we get to prove it. Henry stood as well, coming around the desk to stand close to her. Grace caught a hint of his cologne, that same expensive, subtle scent that had become as familiar as breathing. What if the numbers don't work out? What if the board is right and keeping the company intact is financial suicide? Then we find a third option. We get creative. Grace looked up at him, struck by how natural it felt to have him standing so close. Over the months, they'd developed this habit of gravitating toward each other during conversations, as if they worked better when they were in each other's orbit. Henry, 3 months ago you told me you wanted your work to matter. This is how it matters. Something shifted in Henry's expression, and suddenly Grace was very aware of how close they were standing, how his eyes seemed to be focused on her lips rather than her words. Grace, he said softly, I need to tell you something. What? This stopped being fake for me weeks ago. Grace's heart started beating faster. She'd been trying not to think about the fact that their public appearances had started feeling less like performances and more like dates. Real dates, where she looked forward to seeing him, where she found herself caring more about his reaction to something than about how it looked to photographers. What do you mean? I mean that somewhere between the board presentations and the charity galas and the late-night strategy sessions, I stopped thinking about this as a business arrangement. Henry's hand came up to touch her cheek. I started thinking about it as the best thing that's ever happened to me. Grace's breath caught. She'd been fighting these feelings for weeks, telling herself it was just the intensity of working so closely together, the adrenaline of their professional success. But looking into Henry's eyes now, she knew it was so much more than that. Henry, I know this complicates everything. I know we said we'd keep this professional, but Grace, Grace silenced him by standing on her tiptoes and kissing him. Not accidentally this time, not for cameras or public consumption, but because she'd been wanting to for weeks and was tired of pretending otherwise. The kiss was everything their first accidental one hadn't been, intentional, deep, full of months of suppressed longing and growing connection. Henry's arms came around her waist, pulling her closer, and Grace felt like she was finally home. When they broke apart, Henry was smiling that real smile again, the one that made her stomach do flips. So, he said, his arms still around her waist, I take it the feeling is mutual? It's been mutual for a while now, Grace admitted. I was just too scared to admit it. Scared of what? Grace thought about all the reasons she'd been fighting this. The power imbalance, the professional complications, the fear that she was just another in a long line of women who'd fallen for Henry Ward's charm. Scared that this was too good to be true. Scared that someone like you couldn't really be interested in someone like me. Scared that I'd mess it up somehow. Henry framed her face with his hands, his expression serious. Grace Morgan, You are the smartest, most talented, most genuine person I've ever met. You've changed not just my company, but my entire perspective on what's possible. If anyone should be scared of messing this up, it's me. Why? Because I'm completely, utterly, hopelessly in love with you. Grace's heart stopped. She'd hoped, of course, had caught glimpses of something deeper in the way Henry looked at her, the way he sought out her opinion on everything from business strategy to what to order for lunch. But hearing him say it out loud was different. You are? I am. And I've been trying to figure out how to tell you for weeks. Henry's thumb traced her cheekbone. I love how your mind works, how you see connections that no one else sees. I love how you get excited about spreadsheets when they tell a story you care about. I love how you make me want to be better than I am. I love you too, Grace said, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them. I've been fighting it because it seemed impossible, but I love you too. Henry kissed her again, deeper this time, and Grace felt like her whole world was realigning itself around this moment, this feeling, this man who had somehow become everything she didn't know she was looking for. So what happens now? She asked when they broke apart. Now we stop pretending this is fake and start figuring out how to make it real. Henry's smile was soft and genuine. But first, we save Peterson Industries. Grace laughed. You want to plan a corporate acquisition before our first official date? I want to show you that the man you fell in love with is worthy of that love. Henry's expression grew serious again. This decision will set the tone for everything we do going forward. I want to make the right choice. We will make the right choice, Grace corrected. Together. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind of research, financial modeling, and strategic planning. Grace threw herself into understanding every aspect of Peterson Industries, their market position, their community relationships, their potential for growth. She interviewed employees, spoke with local government officials, and analyzed comparable acquisitions. She also called her father, who'd worked in manufacturing for 30 years before retiring. Dad, I need your perspective on something. Always happy to help, sweetheart. What's going on? Grace explained the situation, careful not to reveal any confidential details, but wanting his insight into the industry dynamics. Companies like that, they're the backbone of communities, her father said thoughtfully. When they fail, it's not just the workers who suffer. It's the local diner that loses half its lunch crowd, the hardware store that supplied their maintenance needs, the bank that financed their employees' mortgages. But what if the company really isn't viable? What if keeping it whole is just throwing good money after bad? Well, that depends on why they're struggling. Is it poor management, outdated equipment, market changes, or just bad luck? Each of those problems has different solutions. Grace spent hours digging into Peterson Industries' financial records, talking to industry experts, and modeling different scenarios. What she found was even better than she'd hoped. The next evening, Grace burst into Henry's office with a stack of documents and her laptop, her eyes bright with excitement. "Henry, you need to see this," she said, barely containing her enthusiasm. "Please tell me you have good news because the board meeting is in an hour and they're expecting me to approve their strip and sell plan." "I have great news." Grace spread her research across his conference table. Peterson Industries isn't just a struggling manufacturing company. It's the anchor business for an entire community. They sponsor the local schools, support the food bank, provide health care for retired employees. The economic impact of keeping them operating goes far beyond their immediate workforce. Henry joined her at the table, studying the documents she'd laid out. "That's nice, Grace, but the board isn't going to be swayed by warm feelings." "They will be when they see this." Grace pulled up a spreadsheet on her laptop. "I found 3 comparable acquisitions where companies preserved the existing structure and invested in modernization rather than asset stripping. In each case, the acquired company became significantly more profitable within 2 years. Henry leaned over her shoulder to study the numbers, and Grace tried to ignore the way his proximity affected her concentration. Even after their conversation yesterday, She was still adjusting to the fact that she didn't have to hide her feelings anymore. "These are impressive returns," he said. "But what makes you think Peterson Industries could achieve similar results?" "Because they have something those other companies didn't have. A workforce that's been with the company for decades, intimate knowledge of their market, and strong relationships with their suppliers and customers." Grace pulled up another document. "Plus, their manufacturing processes are outdated, but their product quality is exceptional. With some capital investment in new equipment, they could increase efficiency by 30% while maintaining their reputation for craftsmanship." Henry straightened up, his business instincts clearly engaged. "What kind of capital investment are we talking about?" $12 million over 2 years. Significant but manageable given Ward Industries' resources. Grace felt her excitement building. "Henry, this isn't just the right thing to do morally. It's the smart thing to do financially." "You're sure about these projections?" "I've run them 3 different ways. Conservative estimates show a positive return within 18 months. Optimistic projections show Peterson Industries becoming one of our most profitable acquisitions within 3 years. Grace pulled up a detailed breakdown of her analysis. "Look at this. They've been losing money on their commercial contracts because their equipment is too slow to meet delivery deadlines. But their specialty work, the custom pieces they make for restoration projects and artisan furniture makers, that's incredibly profitable. They just can't take on enough of it with their current capacity. So we modernize their equipment to increase capacity for the high-margin work while streamlining the commercial side." "Exactly. And we leverage their reputation for quality to move into new markets. There's a growing demand for domestically produced, sustainably manufactured goods. Peterson Industries could be perfectly positioned to capitalize on that trend." Henry was quiet for a moment, studying the data. Then he looked at Grace with an expression of amazement and admiration. "You did all this in 24 hours?" "I had motivation." Grace smiled. "I wanted to prove that doing good and doing well aren't mutually exclusive. You've done more than prove it. You've created a roadmap." Henry gathered the documents. "Let's go present this to the board." The boardroom was tense when they entered. Grace could see the skepticism on the executives' faces as Henry introduced her and explained that she'd been researching alternative approaches to the Peterson acquisition. "With respect, Henry," said Robert Chen, the board's financial expert, "we've already analyzed this deal extensively. The numbers are clear." "The numbers you've seen are clear," Grace said, stepping forward with confidence she didn't entirely feel. "But they don't tell the whole story." What followed was the most important presentation of Grace's career. She walked the board through her research, her financial projections, and her strategic recommendations. She addressed their concerns about risk and return, showed them comparable successes, and painted a picture of Peterson Industries not as a struggling company to be stripped for parts, but as a diamond in the rough waiting to be polished. "The question," Grace concluded, "isn't whether Ward Industries can afford to take this approach. The question is whether you can afford not to. This acquisition will define what kind of company Ward Industries is for the next decade." The room was silent for a long moment. Grace could feel her heart pounding as she waited for their response. Then Helen Morrison, the board's longest-serving member, leaned forward. "Ms. Morgan, these projections assume significant capital investment and operational changes. What makes you confident that Peterson Industries can achieve these results?" "Because they've been doing exceptional work under difficult circumstances for 4 generations," Grace replied. "All they need is a partner who believes in their potential rather than just their assets." Robert Chen studied the financial models on his tablet. "These returns are significantly better than our original projections." "Because our original projections only considered short-term asset value," Henry said. "Grace has shown us the long-term value creation potential." Margaret Yates, the board's newest member, raised her hand. "What about market risk? The manufacturing sector has been volatile lately." Grace had anticipated this question. That's exactly why diversification is so important. Peterson Industries' specialty work is largely insulated from general manufacturing trends. Luxury furniture, historical restoration, custom architectural elements. These markets are growing, not shrinking. And the workforce issues? Asked James Murphy, who oversaw human resources for Ward Industries. Retraining, potential resistance to change? Actually, the workforce is one of our biggest assets, Grace said, pulling up another slide. I spoke with several employees during my research. They're eager for modernization. They know their skills are valuable. They just need better tools to compete. She told them about Tom Bradley, the plant supervisor who'd drawn up detailed plans for workflow improvements, and Maria Santos, the quality control specialist who'd identified opportunities to reduce waste while maintaining their quality standards. These aren't people who are afraid of change, Grace said. They're craftspeople who want to do better work. The board deliberated for 30 minutes while Henry and Grace waited in his office. Grace paced by the windows, nervous energy making it impossible to sit still. Stop worrying, Henry said. Your presentation was flawless. What if they reject it? What if they think I'm being naive about the business realities? Henry stood and caught her hands, stopping her pacing. Then we'll find another way. But Grace, regardless of what they decide, I want you to know that what you did today was extraordinary. You didn't just crunch numbers. You found a way to align our values with our business strategy. We found a way, Grace corrected. This was a team effort. No, this was you being brilliant and fearless and everything I fell in love with. Henry's voice was soft. Watching you in there, seeing how passionate you are about this work, how much you care about getting it right, it just confirmed what I already knew. What's that? That you're going to change the world, Grace Morgan. One company at a time. Before Grace could respond, Patricia knocked on the door. Mr. Ward, the board is ready for you. They returned to the boardroom, where Helen Morrison was waiting with a slight smile. The board has reviewed Ms. Morgan's proposal, she said. We're impressed by the thoroughness of her research and the strength of her financial projections. We're prepared to approve the acquisition of Peterson Industries under the terms she's outlined. Grace felt a surge of triumph, unlike anything she'd ever experienced. They'd done it. They'd found a way to save 800 jobs while creating long-term value for Ward Industries. There is one condition, Robert Chen added. We want Ms. Morgan to oversee the integration process. If she's this confident in her projections, she should be responsible for executing them. Grace looked at Henry, who was smiling with pride and something that looked like awe. I'd be honored, she said. 2 weeks later, Grace stood in the main production facility of Peterson Industries, watching as the new equipment was installed. The energy in the building was palpable. Workers who'd been facing layoffs were now talking excitedly about expanded production capabilities and new contracts. Ms. Morgan? Tom Bradley, the plant supervisor, approached with a smile. I wanted to thank you again for what you've done here. I didn't do anything, Tom. You and your team are the ones who make this place work. Maybe. But you're the one who saw the potential when everyone else saw problems. Tom gestured around the factory floor. My grandfather worked here, my father worked here, and I've been here for 30 years. I thought I was going to be the last Bradley at Peterson Industries. Now I'm thinking my son might want to come work here after college. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. This was why the work mattered. Not just the financial returns or the positive press coverage, but the real impact on real people's lives. Her phone buzzed with a text from Henry. How's the integration going? Better than projected, she replied. Tom Bradley says his son might come work here after college. That's the best return on investment we could ask for. Grace smiled, thinking about how much Henry had changed over the past few months. The Ice King reputation was completely gone now, replaced by coverage that focused on his innovative approach to corporate responsibility. Dinner tonight? Henry's next text read, I have something I want to discuss with you. Business or pleasure? Both. Always both with us. That evening, Grace met Henry at a small Italian restaurant in Little Italy, far from the usual business dinner spots where they might be photographed. Over the past few weeks, They'd been carefully navigating their new relationship while maintaining their professional partnership. "So, what did you want to discuss?" Grace asked as they settled into a corner booth. "The Peterson Industries' success has generated some interesting opportunities," Henry said. "I've had calls from 3 other family-owned companies asking if Ward Industries might be interested in similar partnerships." Grace felt a flutter of excitement. "Really? Really?" And Helen Morrison suggested that we should consider formalizing this approach, creating a dedicated division within Ward Industries focused on sustainable acquisitions. "That's incredible, Henry. It would be exactly what you've been working toward." "What we've been working toward," Henry corrected. "Grace, I want you to head up this new division." Grace nearly choked on her wine. "What?" "I want you to be Vice President of Strategic Partnerships. Your own department, your own team, the authority to pursue acquisitions that align with our values." Henry's eyes were bright with excitement. "It would be exactly the kind of work you're passionate about, on a scale that could make a real difference." Grace stared at him, overwhelmed. 6 months ago, she'd been a coordinator at a mid-tier PR firm. Now Henry was offering her a vice presidency at one of the most powerful companies in America. "Henry, I don't know what to say." "Say yes. Say you'll take a chance on building something that's never been done before." Grace thought about the past few months, about the work they'd accomplished together, about the satisfaction of knowing that her efforts had directly improved people's lives. "Yes," she said. "Absolutely yes." Henry's smile was radiant. "Good, because I've already had HR draw up the paperwork." They spent the rest of dinner talking about the possibilities, about the companies they could help, about the model they could create for responsible capitalism. Grace felt more energized and optimistic about the future than she'd ever felt in her life. As they walked back to Henry's car, Grace's phone rang. "Emma." "Grace, you need to get to a television right now," Emma said without preamble. "Why? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Something's very, very right. Turn on Channel 7. Henry and Grace hurried back to his apartment where they found the evening news coverage of a story that made Grace's heart swell with pride. "In business news tonight," the anchor was saying, "Peterson Industries announced they've received their largest order in company history, a contract to produce custom millwork for the restoration of Grand Central Terminal. Company officials credit new equipment and expanded capacity made possible by their recent acquisition by Ward Industries." The camera cut to an interview with Tom Bradley, who was standing in the factory Grace had visited that morning. "6 months ago, we thought we might lose everything," Tom was saying. "Now we're looking at the busiest year in our company's history. Ward Industries didn't just save our jobs. They helped us build a better future." Grace felt tears streaming down her face as the story continued, highlighting the innovative partnership model and the positive impact on the local community. "You did that," Henry said softly, pulling her into his arms. "You made that happen." "We made that happen," Grace corrected, but she was smiling through her tears. As they held each other, watching the story of their success play out on screen, Grace thought about the journey that had brought them here. From an accidental kiss to a fake relationship, to real love to meaningful work that changed lives, it had been the most unexpected, wonderful adventure of her life. 3 months later, "Grace, stop fidgeting with your dress," Emma whispered as they stood outside the ballroom at the plaza, the same ballroom where everything had started. "I can't help it. This feels like tempting fate." Grace smoothed the emerald green silk of her evening gown, a far cry from the simple black dress she'd worn to that first gala. "Fate has been pretty good to you lately," Emma pointed out. "Successful company launch, Forbes 30 under 30 list, and you're about to announce your engagement to the man of your dreams at the same place where you accidentally kissed him." Grace looked down at the engagement ring on her finger, a vintage Art Deco design that Henry had chosen, because it reminded him of her office building, he'd said, strong and beautiful and built to last. The proposal had happened 3 weeks ago during a weekend trip to the Peterson Industries facility. They'd been walking through the factory, watching the night shift work on the Grand Central Terminal millwork, when Henry had suddenly stopped and dropped to one knee right there on the factory floor. "This is where it all started," he'd said. "Our first real success together, the moment I knew I wanted to spend my life building things with you." Grace had said yes while Tom Bradley and the entire night shift cheered in the background. It had been perfect, unconventional and meaningful, and completely them. The Peterson Industries integration had been so successful that Grace had decided to start her own communications firm, specializing in helping companies align their values with their business strategies. Henry had been her first client and biggest supporter, and now Morgan Communications was one of the most sought-after firms in the city. But tonight wasn't about business. Tonight was purely celebration. The launch party for Grace's firm, combined with their engagement announcement, held in the place where their story began. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice carried from inside the ballroom, "please welcome Henry Ward and Grace Morgan." Grace took Henry's arm as the doors opened, and they walked into the same ballroom where their story had begun. But this time, instead of chaos and embarrassment, there was intention and joy. The room was filled with the people who had become important to them over the past year: business partners, colleagues, friends, and family. Grace spotted her parents near the front, her father looking slightly overwhelmed by the opulence, but proud nonetheless. Tom Bradley was there with his wife, representing the Peterson Industries team. Helen Morrison and several other Ward Industries board members had come to show their support. "Ready for this?" Henry murmured as they made their way to the center of the room. "With you, I'm ready for anything." Henry took the microphone, looking out at the crowd with the same confidence Grace had fallen in love with, but tempered now with warmth and genuine joy. "A year ago," he began, "I was standing in this room when a beautiful stranger accidentally kissed me. It was the best accident of my life." The crowd laughed, many of them remembering the viral photos from that night. "That kiss led to a partnership that transformed my company, and a love story that transformed my life. Grace didn't just change how Ward Industries operates, she changed how I see the world, how I think about success, what I want to build with my life." Grace felt her eyes filling with tears as Henry continued. "Tonight I'm thrilled to announce that Grace has agreed to make our partnership permanent, and to celebrate the launch of Morgan Communications, a firm that's already changing how businesses think about their responsibility to their communities." Henry dropped to one knee, pulling out the ring box even though Grace was already wearing the ring, and the crowd erupted in delighted laughter. "Grace Morgan," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom, "you've made me a better man and a better leader. Will you marry me?" "I already said yes, you ridiculous man," Grace laughed, but she was crying happy tears. "But yes, again, always yes." As Henry stood and spun her around, the ballroom erupted in applause. Grace looked out at the crowd, at Emma crying happy tears, at her parents beaming with pride, at the business leaders who had become friends, at the journalists who would undoubtedly write about this moment, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. "So," Henry said as he set her down and pulled her into his arms, "any regrets about that wrong kiss?" Grace looked up at the man who had become her partner in every sense of the word: business partner, life partner, best friend, and the love of her life. "Not a single one," she said, and kissed him again. This time she was kissing exactly the right person, and as the photographer's flashes went off around them, Grace thought about how different this moment was from that first accidental kiss. This time there was no confusion, no embarrassment, no uncertainty about what came next. This time there was only love, and possibility, and the promise of building something beautiful together. 6 months later, Grace stood at the altar of the small church in her hometown in Ohio, wearing her grandmother's pearl necklace, and a dress that had taken 3 months to design. Through the stained glass windows, she could see the rolling farmland where she'd grown up, so different from the Manhattan skyline that had become home. Henry waited for her at the altar, looking more handsome than should be legal in his custom tuxedo, his eyes bright with love and barely contained emotion. The ceremony was small, just family and their closest friends. Emma was her maid of honor, of course, and had spent the morning crying over Grace's transformation from the girl who microwaved leftover pizza for breakfast, to an actual grown-up who's marrying a billionaire. Tom Bradley had flown in from Michigan with his wife, representing the Peterson Industries family. Helen Morrison was there, beaming with pride at the young woman who had revolutionized Ward Industries. Grace's parents sat in the front row, her father looking distinguished in his best suit, her mother clutching a handkerchief and trying not to cry. As Grace walked down the aisle, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. From an accidental kiss to a fake relationship to real love to meaningful work to this moment, it had been the most unexpected, wonderful adventure of her life. When she reached Henry, he took her hands and whispered, "Hi." "Hi yourself," she whispered back, and they both smiled at the private joke. The ceremony was beautiful and personal, with vows they'd written themselves that spoke about partnership and building something together that was bigger than either of them alone. "Do you, Grace Elizabeth Morgan, take Henry James Ward to be your husband, to love and support him in all his endeavors, to challenge him to be his best self, and to build a life together based on love, respect, and shared purpose?" "I do," Grace said, her voice clear and strong. "Do you, Henry James Ward, take Grace Elizabeth Morgan to be your wife, to love and support her in all her endeavors, to be her partner in both business and life, and to build a future together based on trust, love, and the desire to make the world a little bit better?" "I do," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. As they exchanged rings and shared their first kiss as husband and wife, Grace felt like her heart might burst with happiness. This was what she'd been waiting for her whole life without knowing it. Not just love, but partnership. Not just success, but meaning. The reception was held in the barn on her family's property, transformed with fairy lights and elegant flowers into something magical. Grace and Henry's first dance was to "At Last" by Etta James, and as they swayed together under the stars, Grace thought about how perfectly the lyrics captured their journey. "So, Mrs. Ward," Henry said as they danced, "what's next for us?" "Well, Mr. Ward, I was thinking we could start with a honeymoon in Tuscany, then come back and change the world one company at a time." "Sounds perfect," Henry said, spinning her around. "Though I have one request." "What's that?" "No more accidental kisses. From now on, they're all intentional." Grace laughed, the sound carrying across the warm summer evening. "I think I can manage that." As the song ended and their guests applauded, Grace looked around at all the people who had become part of their story. Emma was dancing with Grace's cousin, already planning the photo album she'd create as a wedding gift. Tom Bradley was deep in conversation with Grace's father about manufacturing techniques. Helen Morrison was charming Grace's mother with stories about Grace's meteoric rise at Ward Industries. "You know what the best part of all this is?" Grace said as they made their way to cut the cake. "What's that?" 6 months ago, I thought my biggest problem was accidentally kissing a stranger at a party. Turns out it was the solution to everything I didn't even know I was looking for." Henry stopped walking and pulled her into his arms right there in the middle of the dance floor. "Grace Ward," he said, "I love you more than I ever thought possible." "I love you too, Henry Ward. Thank you for being worth the accident." As they kissed, surrounded by fairy lights and laughter and the people they loved most, Grace realized that sometimes the best things in life really do happen when you least expect them. Sometimes, the wrong kiss turns out to be exactly right. The end.